I am on the struggle bus today. Hey everyone, hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm Shelly, and today I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in October. If you're new to my channel, then hi, hello, welcome. I am someone who really loves books and reading, and this is a book channel, though I've been dipping my toe ever so slightly into the world of making fashion videos. I know that those don't seem like they align, but in my head they do. So anyways, regardless of that, this is a very standard bookish video in which I talk about all the things that I read the previous month. If that sounds good to you, I would encourage you to subscribe, like the video if you would like, and without any further chit chat, I'm gonna get into the meat of the video. I'm feeling very laid back today in this sweatshirt, and I read a lot of mysteries this month. So maybe I'll do my non-mysteries and then I'll do my mystery reading. All right, I like a little bit of structure in my videos. And so I'm gonna have the mystery section of my video and then any books that are not mysteries, because I read four mysteries this month, I can count. And I am also gonna go from least favorite to most favorite. And the thing is like when I say least favorite, none of these books were bad. They just didn't work out for me for sometimes very specific reasons. And so on the bottom of the non-mystery pile, and I feel kind of bad talking about it in this way because it was recommended to me in one of the comments when I asked you all, when I solicited for recommendations specifically for me. You all came out with all of these wonderful recommendations. And it's been interesting reading through some of those recommendations because it is very hit and miss, truly. And so here's one that was like, it hit home in some ways and it didn't work in other ways. And it's a very much the duality of the reality of this book and me, my relationship with this book. And the book I'm talking about is David Benioff's City of Thieves. Now, this was recommended to me by Gloria Z. Thompson, who is a wonderful, amazing, fantastic booktuber. She's a new mother, and I just adore her. We've like met on Zoom. Wonderful. And she recommended this book to me. The time period, the setting, World War II, Leningrad. We're in Leningrad just after the siege, and so the city is in a wild state. People are looking to just get enough food to eat, to survive, because it is so cold. And of course, politically, things are just all here, there, and everywhere. I mean, there is just no political structure. The good guys are bad guys. The Russians who are supposed to be like protecting the city can be terrible people, but also they're being invaded by Germans. And so you just all around, it is this perilous situation and full of danger and full of intrigue. And then with like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge from Benioff, he, through fate, because it's a very Russian thing, and it's a very like literature thing, the through line of literature, to consider what fate means in our lives and how that is juxtaposed with chance. So through fate, Kolya and Lev are thrown together. Kolya is our pseudo-intellect who likes to hear himself talk, and Lev is our sweet-hearted little baby boy who's just trying to make his way through the world and grapple with some grief. Together, they are sent on this mission to get a dozen eggs for the colonel's daughter's wedding, for her wedding cake. He sends them on this mission. They have to, because of the circumstances, they must like at least try. And then they're on the journey. And in a lot of ways, it's a classic hero's journey. So you have Lev, who is our hero. You have Kolya, who is his spiritual guide, if you will. And with every kind of turn, with every episode, a new obstacle is put in their course. That's what I meant to say. In a lot of ways, it was a lot of fun because once I figured out the structure, I was like, oh, I wonder what's going to happen next. And of course, with every episode or with every struggle that happens in the book, you learn more about Lev, you learn more about Kolya, and there is this sense that they're on this adventure, and I love that about the book. I loved that about this book, and I really wanted to love it. The only thing is that Kolya is, let's just say he's a man of the world. He's very experienced with birds and bees. He has an understanding that Lev is not that way, and there is a lot of guidance, to put it lightly. There is a lot of guidance in that arena, and it really just read as two young men with needs. That's what I'll say. And that really kind of, it did put a block between myself and the characters. There was just times where I was just like, ugh. Because it wasn't even done in a romantic way. You know, there are times, like, I love a good romance novel. I love like romantic novels for sure. It's not about that. It was like kind of the overt nature of hanging out with young men between the ages of like 17 and 19. So they're young, they're new to the world, they're curious about women, and there is a lot of talk about women and women's bodies and their shapes, and I think you get the picture. And I kind of wish that I just wish that wasn't what Kolya was guiding Lev on. Like, he could have been guiding him on something else, but instead he was like definitely the like spiritual mage. I don't know if that's right. He was definitely like the mentor in that specific area, and it felt heavily laden with that kind of language, and I'm not a prude, y'all. Like, someone did call me a prude on my channel once, and it was funny. Like, I loved it so much. I mean, it was like, of course. Of course you think that. It was clearly somebody that doesn't watch my channel. So it's not that, and I'm not even offended by the word, but I do have standards, and in this way, the standard, it was just a little bit much for me. But I did like the book. But because of those standards being questioned in my own heart, it does rank at the bottom. But I could see why it's so well loved, and it was so adventurous, and it was so perilous, and at times, it was so much more brutal than I thought it was going to be. I was like, whoa. And I even lost a night of sleep reading this. So, you know, to give you some idea of like my experience, it was mixed for sure. Next up in this arbitrary order of least favorite to most favorite non-mystery reads is Cranford by Elizabeth Gaskell. I like this book. I was told that I was going to love this book. I had a lot of people just tell me that they thought it was a Shelley book, that this is just the coziest of cozy reads, and it's going to be great, and it's wonderful. And I read this with my friend Anita for Victober. Victober is a wonderful month-long event held in October where we celebrate Victorian reads. And I was so glad to participate in that event and to read my second Gaskell. I read North and South, and then I read this book, Cranford. It's told in vignettes, so what feels like short stories that are loosely connected through main characters. And we're following a group of women and the way that they interact with one another, and their poverty is like a huge key theme in the book, and the way that the women pretend that they're not impoverished, and the way they get around certain societal rules. It was very charming, and it also felt very long. It just was a long read for me. It took me forever, or what felt like the better part of my young life, to finish this. And that's why it ranks in the middle of this stack. There were just certain vignettes that were very, very quiet. And it was hard to love that. It was almost too quiet, is what I'll say. And as much as I enjoyed so much of this little gem of a book, I mean, it's pretty short, it weirdly felt like it was like 400 pages. And that's not the best feeling to have about it, but I am very curious as to other reads, like Wives and Daughters by Gaskell. I'm actually reading my third Gaskell right now for Nonfiction November, and it is The Life of Charlotte Bronte by Elizabeth Gaskell. And she's clearly a talented writer, and I'm enjoying what I'm reading from her, but there can be a little bit of a slowness. She's a bit of a turtle writer, you know, she's She's taking her time, and I think it all comes together in the end. I do think that she has that skill to do that, but sometimes it just takes a little while to like get into the story. And then my favorite read that was not a mystery was The Hours by Michael Cunningham. This I read with my friend George. We discussed it via email, which is a wonderful way to discuss a book, by the way. And this tells the story of 3 women. So you have Virginia Woolf as a character in this fictional story. You also have Clarissa Dalloway, the Mrs. Dalloway, the woman who holds the title of Mrs. Dalloway. You have her as a character as well, and reimagined through Michael Cunningham's writing. And then you have Mrs. Brown. Mrs. Brown is a more contemporary character living in the US. It all connected over theme, I would say. I would say that in a lot of ways, this was an homage, a love story to A Room of One's Own and Virginia Woolf's life in general. And the fact that Virginia Woolf struggled heavily with mental health, mental illness, depression. She had a lot going on in her own life. And so seeing her fictionalized and you know, fighting those battles was really fascinating. And then with this theme of love and friendship and sexuality and partners and mental health / mental illness, the echoes of those themes and how we deal with it, you know, how do we approach these? How do we live through these moments where you love somebody and they've changed, or that you're grappling with your place in the world as a woman, and what does that mean, and what does it mean to do something for yourself? You know, is it selfish or is it not? In the way that it's done as well, you know, there's all these beautiful questions that were just bubbling up through the novel. And what was lovely about it was that it was just so beautifully written. It was just like there was some really like slow stream of consciousness like scenes that were just beautiful. So the writing in this sang, the characters sang. George and I both mentioned how we would love to have Clarissa Dalloway as like our best friend. Like I want a friend like her, full of life and love. And it's just so wonderful to walk away from a story that can give you that feeling where you're like, I want her as my friend. And it was just, in a lot of ways it spoke about the struggles that women go through the decades, and in a lot of ways how it hasn't progressed and changed, even though time has. And that was really great. It was really great. It won the Pulitzer. This is a Pulitzer Prize winning book, and I'm just so glad I read it. It's one of my like TBR vets. Like it's been on my to be read list for ages. And I'm just so glad that I finally read it, and it was beautiful. It was beautiful. All right, I'll scoot to the side because the next book I read digitally, and it was A Dark Fire by C.J. Sanson. This is the next installment, the second installment in his Matthew Shard-Lake mystery series. Matthew Shard-Lake is a big-hearted hunchback lawyer living in Tudor England, working for Thomas Cromwell. And this book was a lot of things. I finished this at the beginning of the month, so some of the details are fading, but there is clearly 2 storylines, one of which is about a young woman who is accused of murdering her cousin, and she is in jail, and her uncle is like championing the fact that she didn't kill her cousin, and Matthew Shard-Lake has this case on his docket. The other case is that there is this mysterious substance that burns even on water, you know, and that it is incredibly flammable and it creates this massive fire, and they're trying to find the substance and figure out what it is, and they're trying to make sure that that substance doesn't get into the wrong hands. And interestingly, I liked the storyline about the woman in prison who you were wondering, like, what's the real story with her and the family? And then the main storyline about Dark Fire, I actually didn't connect with as much. But you have Matthew Shard-Lake, who's just wonderful. And then you have his his new assistant, who is just a great foil for him. Just, he was just great. I ended up really loving him. And the characters were great. And it didn't put me off to reading more of his stuff. I know that there's probably a C.J. Sanson book out there for me. It just seems like the two that I've read thus far in this series, there's something that doesn't quite catch me. It's good. I can see that it's very good, but it doesn't make me think that with that satisfying sigh, like, oh, that was such a great book. It's kind of missing that for me a tiny bit, but I'm still encouraged to read the series. I really love Matthew Shardlake as a character. I'm super curious as to what C.J. Sanson's going to do with the series, and I know that there's going to be a book out there for me. Next up, I read the fourth installment in the Linley series by Elizabeth George, and that is A Suitable Vengeance. I read this with my friend Anita. I actually skipped the third installment, and we went to the fourth for availability reasons. And this is great. It's a prequel, and that was delightful. So we are following Linley and his family. And Thomas Linley has a lot of baggage. He's got a lot going on. And we're at this moment where he's definitely younger. He's a younger person, both emotionally and just more bright-eyed and bushy-tailed with his workforce, and maybe going out there with a little more to prove. He's a little more apprehensive. And we get to meet his mother and his brother, and we get scenes of his father. And it's great. It's great. And we just learn so much more about Helen, who is Tommy Boy's love interest, and Simon St. James and Deborah. We just get so much more of like their background. And in this, there's a great mystery with a couple of great twists. I mean, fantastic. Like, if you're looking for a great mystery and a great mystery series, Elizabeth George is awesome. I have loved all of the mysteries that she gives you. It's so interesting though, because like it's a mystery series I'm gonna keep reading. It's one that I love a lot, but all of her books are like 4-star reads. Does that make sense? Like they're good. I would even say they're like really good. like if we're talking about star rating, which I don't usually do star ratings, it's like 4.5 stars. But rarely are they a 5-star read, but overall the whole series itself is like a 5-star series. The phenomenon of that, I'll have to dig into some other day, because I think that's really interesting. It's like, I know that she's going to give me something good, but maybe not amazing. And for that, I love it. I love it. But that's why it ranks as like, at where it's at. Because again, every mystery is like solid and really good, rather than like mind-blowing, if that makes any sense. I also finished the next in the Jackson Brodie series, One Good Turn, and this is by Kate Atkinson, and I loved it. I just loved it. There's something about Kate Atkinson's writing that makes my heart flutter. Like, I have a bit of a crush on her writing, and I think I said in a previous video that her main character, this ex-cop, sort of, you know, someone who's maybe a little out of touch with their emotional lives, Jackson Brodie, he's like, in the first book I didn't really like him. I was like, I didn't like his choices. He didn't do much for me, but I love the book. I love the book. And in this book, I really fell in love with Jackson Brodie. I thought he was just so charming, so wonderful. There's just something about him where I felt like I could really empathize with his desire to do good in the world, his desire to figure himself out a little bit more, even if it's at a sort of a snail's pace. And you know, I just wanted to give him a big hug. There's just something. Anyways, Turn stars a character named Martin Canning, and he is a writer. And there are a bunch of characters. Oh, Harry's here. Hello, Harry. And there are a bunch of different characters in this book, but Martin Canning is one of our main characters. And in the very beginning, he does something like slightly off kilter and heroic. Like, it ends up being quite heroic. And interestingly, as I read more about this character, I found him ridiculously pathetic. I couldn't stand him, which was interesting because I didn't start off not being able to stand him, but as the book progressed, I despised him a little bit. In a small way, I was like, you're one of the most pathetic characters I've ever read about. And I mean, it was intentional, I believe, on Kate Atkinson's part. And what was funny is that I was still very entertained by those parts. It wasn't like I was like, oh, I don't want to read about Martin Canning. I would get to those parts and I'm like, maybe there's a redeeming quality to this man. And most times that it wasn't the case, but that's okay. I just didn't know I was capable of despising a character as much as I despise Martin Canning. So that was a really interesting experience, and I just really love Kate Atkinson's writing. I just love it. It's just juicy, good, amazing. I have this feeling where I just don't care how long it takes me to read the book, which is unusual for me because a lot of times I put a little bit of pressure to finish out. But I think it's just because I'm enjoying it so much. It just doesn't matter to me. And then my favorite book of the month, probably, I just loved it so much, and it was Foe by Ian Reid. And this is a science fiction, psychological thriller, mystery-esque novel. I think it's more of a suspense novel than a mystery, but there's a mysterious element to it. And it's not far off the mystery path. And it is about a couple in the middle of nowhere who gets visited by a stranger. And from there, you really ought to just go in quite blind. And it does exactly what I love science fiction, what I love from science fiction. The book got me to think about relationships in a different way because it was presented in a scenario that would never happen, but because it was an impossible scenario, it made for an incredible thought experiment. And I love that. And I read this at the very beginning of the month, and I've just continued to love it. It was so good. And I've heard a couple of people say that Ian Reid's books are cuckoo's bananas crazy, is a little off the rails, and I loved it. I loved it because the thought experiment worked. It really got me to think about relationships and what they mean, and kind of looking at something that maybe I take for granted, my own marriage, and I know what my marriage means to me, so I don't often sort of sit in that space where I think about it a lot. But the book got me to think about it in a different way. And I thought that was really fascinating. And of course, what is humanity and how does it echo throughout our own lives, the way that we interact with our own humanity, and what does it mean to be humane? Just all of these things. So, for a book that was sort of deceptively short and deceptively light in its own reading, it has stuck with me. And I really appreciate a book that does that. So, what am I currently reading right now? I am reading The Life of Charlotte Bronte by Elizabeth Gaskell. I started The Soul of an Octopus, so I'm 13 pages in on that. And that is amazing. I am also reading, I'm about halfway through the third book in the Lonely series because I had to go back a little bit, by Elizabeth George, Well Schooled in Murder. And I'm reading Ann Petry's The Street, which I would have shown you all these books. I just didn't realize I was going to do a rundown at the very end of what I'm currently reading. What are you currently reading? What's your favorite book in October? Please let me know. Let me know if it's a book you think I will like, I always like that. And yeah, that's it for me. So thank you so much for watching. Here's Harry. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I will see you all